In February 1994, 30 years ago as of the publishing of this video, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 launched in the West. It was yet another success story for Sega with over 2 million units sold worldwide. I was actually there day one of the power release, as my dad brought a copy home on his way back from work on that day. But behind this classic Sonic game was the tale of a fractured development and a game split into two, which wouldn't become whole again until Sonic & Knuckles launched 8 months later. Hi, I'm Dan the Mega Driver of the Sega Guys, and in this video I'll be looking back at Sonic the Hedgehog 3 on its 30th anniversary, recalling my personal memories of it and giving my verdict on whether it's a great standalone Sonic experience or just a half-complete stopgap. Before I get into my own assessment of Sonic the Hedgehog 3, it's worth getting some context. In 1993, Sonic was riding high off Sonic the Hedgehog 2's release, not just on the Mega Drive or Genesis, but the Sega Master System and the Sega Game Gear too, so naturally a second sequel on Mega Drive was greenlit to follow. Yuji Naka himself created a new team consisting almost solely of Japanese developers for the project. Sonic 3 was initially conceived as something drastically different to before. At first, the plan was an isometric platformer, like Sega Sonic the arcade game or Sonic 3D Blast, and this game would be powered by the Sega Virtua processor. When this project was deemed unfeasible because it wouldn't make the holiday 1993 launch, a more traditional Sonic adventure was created. But again, Sonic Team's plans and ambitions grew as they envisioned a story that would further flesh out Sonic's world and encompass much of what had hit the cutting room floor in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And unfortunately, that meant that it still didn't arrive in time for Christmas 1993. In its place, Sega Technical Institute shuffled out Sonic Spinball while Yuji Naka and Sonic Team continued their work. Around that same time, two things happened. First of all, the size of the game grew beyond expectations, with an expected cart size of 34 megabits, significantly larger than the biggest cart of that time, Street Fighter II, though smaller than Super Street Fighter II, which would come later in 1994. Secondly, despite the pivot to a more recognisable Sonic template, the game was still behind schedule, and with a US McDonald's tie-in due in February, Sega America needed a game on the shelves, and thus, the decision was made to split Sonic the Hedgehog 3 into two parts, with Part 1 arriving in February 1994, and Part 2 following later on that year. Now, at 10 years old, I didn't know any of this, and I wouldn't think that many outside of Sega actually did. The first place I saw Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was in previews in Sonic the Comic, where the titular Hedgehog was still sporting his Sonic 2 sprites, and there was no mention of the game being split in two. The next place I saw the game, it was in Mean Machine Sega's huge 6-page preview. Whoever had supplied them with the details of Sonic 3 at Sega Europe had let a few details slip, with the preview mentioning 12 zones, when the retail release of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 would have just 6. But the biggest hint came from the tiny little box art called Hold On To Your Hats. In here is the very vague rumour that the game would be coming in more than one cart form. Beyond that though, the only confirmation we had was the game was coming soon, and that game was indeed Sonic the Hedgehog 3. And that being the case, why would anyone care beyond that? Because in the end, no one did. All the previews celebrated Sonic the Hedgehog 3 as the next full 16-bit entry to the series. After side projects like Sonic Spinball, Chaos and CD, which no one I knew played because the Mega CD was so damn expensive, the hype for the next mainline Sonic game was building. As for me, I was still playing Street Fighter II Special Champion Edition, which I'd got for my birthday in November, and Aladdin, which I got for Christmas. So when Sonic the Comic confirmed the 24th of February release date, I was excited, but I had no idea how I was going to get a copy for myself. In my head, I'd have to wait until my birthday for Sonic 3 to make its way into my home, especially given the £60 price tag. The 24th of February rolled around, and there was chatter at school about the new Sonic game coming out that day. One kid claimed that he'd got it already, which most of us didn't actually believe. I came home, had dinner, played some Mega Drive, and tried not to think of the game that I couldn't have. So you cannot imagine my shock when my dad came home, game in hand, as a special surprise for us. It was so unexpected. we'd usually just get one game for our birthday or one for Christmas and that would be it. So this is why the memory stays with me today. We said our thank yous and then we rushed upstairs and slammed that Sonic 3 cart into our Mega Drive and got playing. On my first go, I managed to get to the Hydrocity zone before getting caught by a chomper badnik who whittled down my last life. This here is actually my original cartridge for the game, and in this clip you can see that many of my original saves are still intact. So back then, did it feel like half a game, or was I happy with what we had? The first thing that struck me was how different Sonic the Hedgehog 3 looked. Whereas Sonic 2 sprites were modified versions of the original, here Sonic and Tails were completely redrawn. But it wasn't just the sprites. Everything in the game was overflowing with more detail. The first zone, Angel Island, is a stunning set of stages and may be, subtly, one of the most visually impressive titles on the Mega Drive. There's an enormous amount of line scrolling and parallax in that lavish green jungle in that opening act. It's extremely impressive how the different planes above and below illustrate the thickness of the jungle, with clear blue skies once you get above the canopy. That leads to the fiery destruction of the zone by the first act's mini-boss, quickly turning the vibrant greens into hues of orange and red as an inferno rages through the zone. It's a stark transition and it sets the stage for the themes which carry through the remaining zones, with opening acts and subsequent ones differing in styling as zones evolve over the course of Sonic's journey. Sonic 3's team strives to make the game more cinematic, with cutscenes taking place between acts, which helps the transition between zones as they evolve. And all of these zones are visually impressive, whether it's the depth of the parallax in zones like Marble Garden with its vast grassy fields, or the ocean of shifting glaciers in Ice Cap, or even the intricate detailed backdrops we see in Carnival Night. Sonic 3 is a beautifully varied and visually complex game that is easily one of the better looking titles of that entire generation. And that's before we get to the 3D special stage, which moves with a level of fluidity on how the special gaze moves and how objects scale that few other Mega Drive games achieve. So from a visual standpoint, the 10-year-old Dan the Mega Driver was blown away. Music was fantastic too, and this is where every single piece of music was new, including the long-standing stage clear music which had persisted for a number of games. Angel Island by Jun Shinui remains a track almost as iconic as Green Hill and stands in stark contrast to his newer work on games like Sonic 4 and Sonic Superstars. Every piece of music in Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is phenomenal from its plethora of contributing artists. Now, I'll touch briefly on the elephant in the room, the contribution from Michael Jackson. It was something rumoured at the time, but was only confirmed in recent years. MJ and his producer, Brad Buxer, produced as many as 7 tracks that made it into the final game, though Sega and Jackson distanced themselves from this for various reasons. Nonetheless, all were replaced by the time that Sonic Origins rolled around, and 3 of them were replaced when locked onto Sonic & Knuckles. It's a shame, as the songs are all fantastic. The ending theme, rumoured to be the basis for Michael's Stranger in Moscow, is outstanding, and far better than the medley at the end of Sonic & Knuckles puts in its place. The Knuckles theme, and minor boss themes too, are excellent, and are exclusive to Sonic 3 Standalone, almost worth the price of admission for playing this game in its original form. But I'm getting ahead of myself. So, mini bosses or minor bosses, I've mentioned them twice now, and yes, they were new to the series for Sonic 3 and a welcome surprise. Act 1 of each stage features a beefed up badnik from Dr. Robotnik before you battle the good doctor himself at the end of Act 2. This means that Sonic the Hedgehog 3 has 14 boss encounters, which is more than any other Sonic game. And that leads us nicely into the size of the game itself. There are 6 zones, just 6, which lines up against the original Sonic the Hedgehog, but is around half of what we had in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Not only that, but each zone has 2 acts in Sonic 3, continuing the trend started in Sonic the Hedgehog 2. And when you add all the acts together, things aren't as impressive. Sonic the Hedgehog 3 has a total of 12 acts, compared to 18 in the first game and 20 in the second. And upon realising this, as a kid, I was concerned that we'd been given a smaller game. However, the numbers don't tell the whole story here. Much of Sonic the Hedgehog 3's marketing talk, as well as an extract from the game's own manual, boasted on how the acts were 3 times larger than the previous game. In some ways this feels like marketing overcompensating, in others it seems like they were suspiciously over-egging it. But no, it's actually true. Given how you can burst through the stages in prior Sonic games in less than a minute in many cases, That certainly isn't the case with Sonic the Hedgehog 3, where acts can take at least a minute and a half to run from point to point. Granted, this is including the boss battles, but even then, running from point to point isn't actually the focus of Sonic the Hedgehog 3. More than any other mainline entry at that point, with the exception of Sonic the Hedgehog CD, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 encourages exploration. Stages have a lot more verticality than any Sonic game in the franchise up to that point, which is the core of the 3 times larger boast. This is driven not only by the multiple routes in the game, which translate to the higher, middle and lower paths for Sonic, but the exploration expands depending who you play as. Yes, unlike Sonic the Hedgehog 2 where characters were essentially just sprite swaps, in Sonic the Hedgehog 3, Tails and Sonic both have unique abilities accessible at the double tap of a button. Sonic has his Insta-Shield, which can protect him if timed correctly, and adds a few extra pixels to his hitbox when attacking. Tails' signature flight controls meanwhile are completely player controlled now, with additional presses of the jump allowing him to fly even higher. What's more is he's able to carry Sonic when flying, adding a new dimension to co-op. The reason why this is important and how it ties into the stage design is down to the Chaos Emerald collecting. Unlike the first 2 games where you could access the special stage pretty easily if you had 50 rings, here you have to find the giant rings hidden away in the game's acts to get a chance of grabbing those Chaos Emeralds. You can access the game's Gumball Machine bonus stage by hitting the star post with 50 rings, but that won't yield you a Chaos Emerald, though you do get some decent power-ups. Because the special stage rings are hidden, you absolutely have to explore the giant acts to find them, and at times that may mean using Tails' flying abilities. Special stages take place on these small planetoids where you collect a set amount of number of blue spheres whilst avoiding the red ones in order to collect the Chaos Emerald. Fail the stage and you need to find yourself another special stage ring. If you're going into Sonic the Hedgehog 3 cold, finding the special stage's giant rings is a sizable task and substantially adds to the game's runtime, and that is why the claims around the size of the acts are so important. So the number of levels is offset by the size of the levels in question. But what else is there? Well, aside from the choice of playing as Sonic or Tails, or both, which actually does alter how you play the game, a concept that will be fully realised in the next instalment, there's the competition mode. This is actually worth mentioning, as it's unique among Sonic titles in that the 5 zones in this mode are unique and entirely separate from the main game. They're all short and consist of doing 5 laps of a singular act, but it's a refreshing addition nonetheless. Yes, the multiplayer isn't quite as robust as Sonic the Hedgehog 2, as they encompass nothing more than a straight race to finish, but they're still fun. You can even run them in single player as a time attack, or what's more, you can play as Knuckles. Yes, he's just a straight swap of Sonic, lacking the abilities he'd receive in Sonic and Knuckles, but still, as a kid, I was thrilled to use him. So, was Sonic the Hedgehog 3 a half-baked game? An incomplete experience that left us disappointed? Well, no. Okay, technically it's incomplete. If you access the level select, you could see where the stages from Sonic and Knuckles were cut, since they occupy space in the menu. But as a game on its own, Sonic the Hedgehog 3 is a substantial entry to the series. When I was capturing footage from a gameplay, my playtime was over an hour and 20 minutes, and that's knowing where the giant rings are and being able to beat the special stages at my first attempt. Mostly. This compares well to playtimes I clocked up in 2023 for Sonic 1 at just under an hour and Sonic the Hedgehog 2 in an hour and 20 minutes. At the time, I never felt that Sonic 3 was half a game. I recall beating the game for the first time in 1994, and it took me about 3 weeks, which was significantly more than the single afternoon it took for us to best Sonic Chaos the Christmas before. And that was without the emeralds. That said, as a kid, I lost a day or two to the barrel puzzle on Carnival Night Act 2, but even then, I managed to cheese past it using a bubble shield and auto-fire. Sonic 3 was a game I was utterly in love with all over again, just like prior Sonic games. That said, even back in 1994, I still preferred Sonic the Hedgehog 2. Even as a kid, not only did I think that the ending of Sonic the Hedgehog 3 was a bit anticlimactic, but I preferred the speedier, more streamlined Sonic 2 even early on. And that still persists today. I prefer Sonic 2 over Sonic 3, Sonic & Knuckles and Sonic Mania, but that's by the by. But still, I loved the different approach of Sonic 3. The huge zones and the new cutscenes that were added really bring the story of the game to life. The verdict then? Total classic! Sonic 3 was never considered half a game, even in interviews. Staff had maintained that Yuji Naka and his team created 2 games worth of content with Sonic 3 and Sonic & Knuckles, and it's something that I feel is lost today. If you can, I highly recommend playing Sonic the Hedgehog 3 on its own. The music is superior and you get the Big Arms boss, which was cut when logged into the follow-up. Back on release, it was regarded as an exceptional game, and it still is. Of course, the complete Sonic the Hedgehog 3 and Knuckles experience is still the best way to play, but take nothing away from the original solo release. It's a phenomenal game in its own right. So happy anniversary to a genuine Sonic the Hedgehog classic, a game designed far too grand to be constrained to one cartridge, but ultimately this version was distilled into a near perfect solo release. It may have been enhanced 8 months later, but for this gamer it was more than enough to keep him occupied until November that year. Thank you very much for watching. If you've enjoyed this, please give us a like and a subscribe if you haven't already, and please get in touch. I'd love to hear your views on Sonic the Hedgehog 3 in the comments below. You can also get in touch with us on X. You can find me at Swooper_D. You can find James at the Segaholic, and you can find the account at Sega Guys. You can also join our Discord server, and if you really want to help us out, you can become a member, which starts from as little as just 99 pence. But that's all for now. We hope you enjoyed the video, and until next time, we will see you on the Sega side.
Thank you.